We have Then we have a terrestrial coordinator, an education and outreach coordinator who we're currently hiring for. And then we have our PRISM coordinator, Christopher Williams, who's also here today and will be speaking a little bit later on in the presentation. Some of our core functions, we coordinate partner efforts, we recruit and train citizen volunteers. So if you're interested in any volunteer opportunities, visit our website or join our listserv. We post those regularly. We identify and deliver education with outreach. We establish early detection and monitoring networks, implement direct eradication and control efforts of invasive species. And then we also award funding for invasive species resource work with RFPs, and that is our request for proposals. So on this slide, you'll see just a few examples of what we do. In the lower left-hand corner, that is a floating classroom. So we actually go out with people. We talk about the invasive species that we see on the water. It's one of my more favorite things to do. And then we have terrestrial removal efforts. And then all the way over there on the right, we partner with towns to do different invasive species works. So what is an invasive species? Just so we're all on the same page. Invasive species are non-native species that can cause harm to the environment, the economy, or to human health. Invasive species come from all around the world. So as international trade increases, so does the rate of invasive species introductions. So invasive species will come in on crates or different plants or foods that are coming from different parts of the world. And it can be difficult to kind of monitor every single piece of food or plant that's coming in from different areas. So on this slide, on either end, we have photos of the spotted lanternfly. This is kind of an incoming threat species. So it's a tier 1 species in the capital region PRISM, and I'll talk a little bit later on about, do you have a question? I'll talk a little bit later on about what the tier system is for us and how we utilize that for our invasive species work. And then we have the Asian longhorn beetle, which is the second in from the left there. In the middle, we have our emerald ash borer, which feeds on ash trees. And then the microscopic image there is the hemlock woolly adelgid. I wish I could ask you all if you've ever heard of hemlock woolly adelgid before, but it's what we're most surveying for right now. It feeds on hemlock trees and it's most identifiable in the winter time. So when you flip over the branch of a hemlock tree at the base of the needles, you will find little woolly kind of egg sacs almost. And the hemlock woolly adelgid will give itself that coat for the winter time. So why are invasive species a threat and what do they cause and contribute to? So they affect nearly every aspect of our world and they're considered one of the greatest threats to our biodiversity. They contribute to a reduction in biodiversity through habitat degradation, the loss of native fish, wildlife, plants, and tree species, hemlock woolly adelgid being an example of that. A decrease in recreational opportunities and income, along with crop damage, diseases in humans and livestock. So as the aquatics coordinator now, I automatically think of a decrease in recreational opportunities being when you're out on the water. So when you're out on the water and you see the surface blanketed with vegetation, aquatic vegetation, that would likely be an aquatic invasive species. So it makes it difficult to boat through, to fish, and I wouldn't want to go swimming through that. So definitely a decrease there. They are estimated to cost the United States $120 billion each year, which is a huge number. This is a little bit outdated, so give or take just a little bit. But some of the species that contribute to this number are the spotted lanternfly, which are middle images there in different life stages. And then hydrilla, which is in the lower right-hand corner, which is an aquatic invasive species. So the 120 billion, that includes kind of control costs, monitoring costs, restoration. So I can kind of the best way to reduce this number is to reduce invasive species introductions from the beginning. So these are some of our common terms that we use around the office. So I'll just kind of go through a few definitions to make sure that we're all on the same page. We'll start with native species, which are the species that we like. They're indigenous to a region at the time of European settlement. So kind of before there was any human influence in bringing species in from different parts of the world. And then native species also support some of the most biodiversity. The plants, or I mean, I guess the insects and animals that are from this area prefer to eat and feed on native species compared to invasive species. And then we have our non-native species, which are also called exotic, introduced, or alien. So this is an accidental or purposeful introduction of a species. These aren't always bad. So just because they're non-native doesn't mean that they're invasive. Crops are a good example of this. So when you plant corn, it typically stays in the area that you've planted it in. It isn't escaping into the environment. So in that case, they actually do humans more good than harm. And then we have our nuisance species. So this can be non-native or native, and it interferes with human activities. So I automatically think of dandelions as a nuisance species, especially with gardeners. A lot of gardeners don't want dandelions in their beautiful green lawn, and you have to consistently go out and pull them. So even though they're a nuisance to you, they are just considered a weed. They're not considered an invasive species. And then we have our ornamental species. So gardeners typically love their ornamental species. I certainly think that they're pretty too. So it's an intentional planting of a species that is grown for how it looks in a garden. We'll talk about in these next couple of definitions as well about how ornamental species can become problematic. So naturalized species is an intentional planting that has escaped into the natural environment. And so when you have a naturalized species, or I guess when we have an ornamental species that we've planted in our garden and it's staying in that area, it's not a problem. But when it's escaped into your surrounding forest or into your neighbor's yard, that's when it kind of reaches the tipping point and gets on our radar that this could potentially be an incoming invasive species. So then we have our sleeper species. So this is a naturalized species. So remember, that's the intentional planting that has escaped, that has shown the potential to become invasive with climate change. So as temperatures are warming up, seasons are getting longer, that supports those naturalized species more, and they're able to kind of reproduce and outcompete native species. And then we have our invasive species. So this is a species that rapidly reproduces and displaces native species. And it continues on to this. And these are some characteristics of invasive species. So it's important to note that, you know, the plant or animal that we're talking about doesn't need to have all of these characteristics. It could just have 2 or 3 and still be considered invasive. So typically they have no known predators or healthy competition. They generally have a competitive advantage over local species, in part because they don't have predators. They respond better to changes in temperature and harsher environments. They're sometimes low in nutritional value. They're capable of greater populations and dispersal and can populate disturbed soils quickly. So it's important for gardeners to know that if you have a new garden bed that you're starting kind of with a clean slate of soil, then you would want to put in your plantings before an invasive species could take over that area, because they really like that clean slate. And then once established, invasives can keep native plants from returning. So we have this term here, a monoculture. So this is a dense single species or stand of growth, which limits the availability of light, water, nutrients, and space. So some of the examples that we have on this slide in the bottom left-hand image, that is purple loosestrife. You don't typically see monocultures of this anymore because there was a biocontrol, an insect that is host specific, so it only feeds on the purple loosestrife. But then we have above that something called burning bush. And so burning bush is a species that a lot of people have in their garden. It's actually pretty negative. It can create these monocultures in forested areas. And then we have an aquatic invasive species called water chestnut, that other lower image there. And it actually looks like land in that image, but there's water underneath that. That's how dense it can grow. So invaders can change the soil hydrology and composition, the resiliency of the environment, overall just resulting in low biodiversity. And it doesn't stay contained to that one area. So when you see an area that has only burning bush, it can have a slight domino effect in the surrounding ecosystems as well. So some of the ways that you can kind of learn which plants and animals are prohibited and regulated are through these booklets. So for our prohibited plants and animals, they're defined as that they cannot be knowingly be possessed with the intent to sell, import, purchase, transport, or introduce. In addition, no person shall propagate prohibited invasive species. So this is kind of the stricter out of the two. Next, we have regulated. So regulated species cannot knowingly be introduced into a free living state or introduced by a means that one should have known would lead to such an introduction, although such species shall be legal to possess, sell, buy, propagate, and transport. So an example of a species that you would see in the invasive plants booklet here is burning bush. Burning bush is still sold in your big box stores, your local nurseries, because it is a regulated species. And so although it is considered invasive, you can't go to these stores and say, you can't sell this anymore. It would have too big of an economic impact and would be kind of unfair to that business owner. So kind of as a compromise, you could say those business owners are supposed to have these tags on the invasive species, just alerting consumers that it is an invasive species. It could have a negative impact to the environment. Yeah, and just making people more aware. So New York State has its own threat ranking system for invasive species. So we're kind of getting into now how we as the Capital Region PRISM determine what projects are going to be most worthwhile to work on and what species are most worthwhile to focus on. So the New York State ranking system ranks species in a two-stage process. So first you rank them based on these section categories. So ecological impact, biological characteristic and dispersal ability, ecological amplitude and distribution, and then of course its difficulty of control. So the species, let's say this is a flower, the flower would get points based on all of these section categories. And the total number that you see here, this would be a very high threat flower because it got a total score of 100. So anything 80 or above is considered a very high threat in the New York invasiveness rank. High threat is 70 to 80, moderate 50 to 70, about 70. Low is 40 to 50, and insignificant is anything below 40. So a new assessment of over 400 plants is going to happen relatively soon if it's not already underway. for those green and blue booklets that we were just looking at. 70 of those 400 plants may be regulated in 2023. So if you are starting a garden or you're looking at replacing some of the plants in your garden, you want to be aware of sleeper species and cultivars because those would likely be turned into regulated species in 2023 for those booklets. So next we have our New York State invasive species tiers. So we have our invasiveness rank, and now we have our tier system. So for our tier system, this image is from a website from the New York State Natural Heritage Program. And you can actually, if you're interested in looking at this later, you could jot down this link that's below here. I could always provide that at the end too in the chat box, but to see what tier an invasive species is in your area, you would use these filters. So you have your geography. So in this case, I clicked statewide and CRP. CRP is the capital region PRISM. There are 8 PRISMs in New York. And so the other ones that you see here are those other PRISM filters. And then of course, you can also select all geographies. And then we have our type of species that we're looking for. So I clicked terrestrial plant because we're gardeners today. And then also our tier value. So I want to look at all of the tier values, 1 through untiered. So here you would see, for example, a myrrh maple. And so that is the last species on the list down here. It is a terrestrial plant. Its ecological impact is moderate. Socioeconomic impact, you can look up, it's insignificant positive. It's untiered in New York State and also untiered in our capital region PRISM, but there are some that are tiered on this list as well. So looking at the tier chart that we have, we look at this and it's really a time and area scale. So it shows that the longer that an invasive species is in an area, the greater the control cost and the greater the effort it takes to control that species. Oh, sorry. So our tier 1 is prevention. So we focus most on tier 1 and tier 2 species. For tier 1, we're really focused on, oh, sorry about that, I have a tickle in my throat. For tier 1, we focus on education and outreach and also early detection. So we're really focusing for tier 1 right now in our capital region for spotted lanternfly, which is an invasive plant hopper from Asia, and it feeds on over 70 different plant types. So we hope to prevent just a mass population dump on the capital region PRISM. So again, we're really focused on education and outreach and early detection monitoring networks. Then tier 2, we have eradication. And so this is when there's a small number of localized populations of that species, and eradication is really possible. So we focus most on these tiers because it means that we can focus on more than just one species, and not all of our control costs will just go to one species. It'll be a little bit more diverse. And then we have tier 3, which is containment. So at this time, the invasive species has kind of taken over an area, and we just want to prevent it from spreading any further outside of kind of its current state. So it's a rapid increase in distribution and abundance, and eradication is unlikely at this time. And then our long-term management is our tier 4 species. So the invasive species is widespread and abundant. Long-term management is aimed at population suppression and asset protection. So if there's an ecologically significant area, like a ecologically significant lake, we would want to prevent an invasive species from spreading any further into that lake. some examples of this. If you could think in your heads quickly about which invasive species you would target first based on the tier system. So we have 2 tier 2 species, and then we have a tier 4 species. So out of these 3, we would want to focus on kudzu first. Although periwinkle is also a tier 2 species, kudzu has a higher threat score. So with a threat score of 84, it can rapidly reproduce and spread and take over an area versus periwinkle, which is also tier 2, but its threat score is 57. So it's not going to spread as quickly. It's still definitely concerned and would take our attention, and we would work towards eradicating that population. But kudzu is currently a tier 2 species in the capital region. So we are trying to suppress those populations. And then we have oriental bittersweet. So some of you may be familiar with this species. It is a tier 4 species in the capital region. Its threat score is 87, so actually higher than kudzu, but it's so widespread and abundant that eradication really isn't possible. Again, we're focusing on long-term management, focusing on protecting ecologically significant areas and making sure it doesn't spread any further. So these are some of our fact sheets and accredited institutions. So we get a lot of our information from these websites and resources. So if you ever have questions about invasive species, specific invasive species, then you could visit these websites. They have some really great information. And again, I can include this in the chat box as well. Okay, so if we have any questions, I hope I can answer them. I'm not a regional expert quite yet, so if we could use common names, not scientific, I would appreciate that.
Anna, would you like to stop sharing your screen?
Sure, I can do that.
Now you can see everybody.
And I have a quick question now. I didn't go to that website yet, but if I went to that website that showed the species tier table and all that, can you click on them and actually show a picture of them? So, because a lot of these plants, I don't know what they are, but I know that they shouldn't be growing here, and I would like to see if they are an invasive species.
Yeah, definitely. So I believe when you click on the actual species, if it is clickable, on the New York State Natural Heritage Program website with the tier chart, it takes you to something called IMAP invasives, which shows its distribution throughout the capital region. So it won't take you to specific information about that invasive species, but on our website, we do have some invasive species listed with their information, and you could always look it up on another PRISM if we didn't have it for some reason.
Wonderful, thank you.
And I can actually include that quickly.
I think I'll make a comment right now too, as long as it's quiet and everybody's thinking. I put into the chat box just before it's an evaluation for today's program, and also there's a place in there that you can put in suggestions if you'd like more of this kind of information or what you would like. So I want to ask about bittersweet. I didn't realize bittersweet was an invasive. It's all over the place. I mean, but I don't see it as, taking over like some of that bamboo stuff that I just keep trying to dig out of the bank year after year.
Yeah, bittersweet is pretty widespread throughout the capital region. And in the image that I had shown, you can kind of see that it does vine its way up trees. And over time, those vines will just basically choke out the tree and kill it. And eventually the tree will die, but it will stay upright because the vines are so strong. They almost use you could say they use the tree corpse to hold itself up.
I have stuff that I call wild grape. It's all along the creek. Now, I don't know that that's really what it is, but it it kills the trees because it does just that. It just, goes up and pulls them all down. Is that something other than wild grape? Does any know that
I
one at all?
would have to see an image of it,
Yeah,
or
sorry.
yeah, I'm not sure what that would be.
But it does the same thing. It holds them right up there.
Mhm.
Once they die, they're there. I go along and cut them off.
The difference with the grape though is that it comes out of the tree. It's not quite as strangling. Whereas the bittersweet it's almost impossible once it gets established to, to get it out unless you actually cut it and kill it.
Mhm.
Definitely. And like many other invasive species, it takes repeat work. So
Yeah.
you have to go back year after year and then monitor to make sure it doesn't come back.
Yeah, the best thing is to pull it up by the roots if you can.
I always cut them off right down, the
But then
base.
they grow.
All right.
Hannah?
Actually, there is a technique to cut them. You have to do it in the fall when the nutrients are sucked into the roots. It's called hack and squirt, is that you make a cut in the major stem near the bottom of the plant and you squirt a weed killer, which comes in a very sort of, not a spray formulation, but you can always also get a drippy formulation. And just put it in the cut that you make. And hopefully that will kill that portion of the vine that is going up the tree. Otherwise, pulling them up just sometimes allows them to spread more furiously because now you have made extra areas from which it can shoot up. At least that's what the tree people have told me.
Thanks, Brita. Useful.
You can look up hack and squirt on YouTube. They'll
Okay.
show you exactly how to do it.
I was always under the impression it was illegal to cut bittersweet.
Somebody said you can?
Yeah.
No. But I think I might jump back in if there aren't any more questions.
They didn't hear us.
Comment on the bittersweet. I think what's illegal was to sell
Oh.
it. They were trying to
Ah.
stop its propagation. And
Ah,
it's lovely. I mean, I cut it, and then it's also not safe for children, the berry. So, I used to
Okay.
like put it I'd like to put it as a decoration till I did that after my kids were old. Now that I have little, I can't do it again because they're attractive
Yes.
to children.
It's likely in the prohibited book.
And how you can feel differently about an invasive species. I mean, listen to us, talking about it.
Isn't bittersweet the one with
I'd like
berries
to know
on
more
it?
about kudzu. I mean, I just saw that little
Oh.
picture. I'm not familiar with it.
Yeah, so kudzu is a tier 2 species. I believe it was introduced into the United States in the 1800s as it was either livestock feed or for shade. So it was intentionally introduced a long time ago, and that was definitely before the time where people really understood invasive species and, the problems that they can cause.
Jerry,
Do you
you're
have a question,
muted.
Jerry?
You're muted.
Hannah, I have a question. Our garden club every year had a lovely plant sale and made a wonderful sum of money for our scholarship fund. And we had to stop doing that a few years ago because of the Asian jumping worm. And I wondered, is that something that we can anticipate will be gone soon?
Hi, this is Chris. In a minute here, we'll let Hannah get back to her presentation to keep things on track. I'll be doing a segment on jumping worm today when we get there. As far as the bare root stock sales, that's kind of the way to go at this moment in time. The jumping worm is not going anywhere. It's been on the Northwest coast for over 20 years, relatively new here. It is found over 11 counties in this region. It's just underreported, and prevention's the strategy. So I would recommend looking into procuring a vendor that would sell you bare root stock and like seedlings like that to distribute. And that's another way to do it, which is much more ecologically friendly to your people purchasing things.
Okay,
All right,
thank
Hannah,
you.
back to you.
All right, great. I'll start sharing my screen again. Oop, might just take me a second. All right, there we go. So now we're going to talk about some actual invasive species that we have in this area. So terrestrial invasive plants and some alternatives that you can use in your own gardens. So first we have winged burning bush, also known as just burning bush. I will not attempt to pronounce the scientific names of these species that we're talking about today, but it is a tier 4 species, so it's widespread throughout the capital region. It creates those monocultures that we were talking about earlier. It's native to northeastern Asia and Japan. It was introduced intentionally in 1860 as an ornamental species. It grows 20 feet in height. It invades forests throughout the eastern United States. One key identification characteristic is that it has 2 to 4 corky ridges, and those really form around the young stems. So as stems mature and as the bush matures, it loses those corky ridges. The foliage is opposite, with dark green leaves that are less than 2 inches long. They're smooth and rounded and tapered at the tips. And one of the key attractions to burning bush is that the leaves turn that bright red color in the fall time. So the flowers are a little bit difficult to see. They're inconspicuous and are greenish yellow and have 4 petals. They develop late April to June and lay flat against the leaves. So if you're looking from afar, it can be kind of hard to see the flowers. The fruit appears from September to October and are reddish capsules that split to reveal orange fleshy seeds. And hundreds of seedlings are often found below that big parent plant, that big burning bush, and that's called the seed shadow. So there are a couple of issues with burning bush. So one of the issues is how rapidly it can spread once it's introduced to an area through its seed. So the seed shadow, if it's on a hill or any type of slope, rain can wash those seeds down and then introduce kind of a new population, and that will continue on and on. And then also birds eat those seeds. And so when the bird drops the seeds again, they are still viable. And that also introduces burning bush into a completely new area. So that's one of the big downfalls to burning bush. So integrated pest management, that is what IPM stands for, is to use manual and mechanical treatments for small infestations and to cut the stump and treat with foliar sprays for large populations. And then also for management, you want to manage the plant before it goes to seed. One of the alternatives is the red chokeberry. I have this plant in my backyard. I love it. The birds love it. There are red and black chokeberry species. They differ in their fruit color, so I have both of them on this slide. They also have red foliage in the fall, and they grow between 5 and 12 feet tall. I think one of the main differences, it's not really a scientific term, but they're a little bit more wispy, so they have a little bit more movement than the burning bush would. They have small white flowers that bloom in the spring, and they prefer sun and part shade. I have mine right up against one of my fences, and it's thriving there. It's really happy. They're drought tolerant, and the bonus for this is that it attracts songbirds to your garden. Another alternative, and I wish I had this, is the high bush blueberry. So this is native to North America, meaning that it was present before the time of European settlement. It can be used as an informal hedge plant. The leaf color is green with that reddish color that happens in the fall. So with both of these alternatives, you still get that beautiful red color that you would get with burning bush. And this can grow between 6 and 12 feet high. It's slow growing, and in colder zones, it usually is a little bit shorter for cold hardiness. And your bonus here is that the fruit is edible. Our next invasive species is Japanese barberry. So this and burning bush are two really problematic species for the capital region, problematic shrub species. So this is native to Japan and was introduced as an ornamental species in 1875. It forms dense stands in a variety of habitats. So it's not specific to just a wetland habitat or a really dry environment. It does have that kind of advantage over a native species. It's highly shade tolerant and grows 2 to 8 feet tall and wide. It has small oval and alternate leaves. The foliage is green to a dark reddish purple, and the stems have single spines along their length. So it's a thorny plant. Yellow flowers are produced during the springtime underneath the foliage. And this is a human health risk because it harbors ticks. So small mammals will go into the Japanese barberry plant kind of as protection, and those small mammals like mice have ticks, and that increases the tick population wherever there's Japanese barberry. So if you go near a Japanese barberry plant, make sure you check yourself for ticks. One of the management techniques is to take a shovel to it and try and remove it that way. Just use proper gear for yourself. Don't get thorns stuck in you. It can be achieved in a single growing season removal with a two-step approach, so mechanical or heat. So you want to kill above ground plant material with that method. And then you want to follow that by a mid-season treatment of targeted herbicide or a second heat treatment. So this slide here is not just specific to Japanese barberry. This is 3 species. 2 of those are burning bush and Japanese barberry. So in kind of the upper left-hand corner of this, and this is 880 acres of parcel area. So those green kind of areas are Japanese barberry populations. So there is no human influence to the plants that are here. This is really just birds eating those seeds. They drop them in this area, and those seeds are still viable and create these populations of invasive species where there's no other human influence. So it shows the effects that even just one burning bush in your yard can have to this area. And they want to designate this area as Karner blue butterfly habitat. But that's problematic with all of these invasive species. So an alternative to Japanese barberry is the Virginia rose, also has thorns. It grows between 6 and 8 feet tall. It has that dark green foliage with orange to red foliage in the fall. The flowers range from pink, yellow to rose purple, and it prefers full sun or part shade. So it would also probably do pretty well along a fence line. And your bonus here is that it is a pollinator powerhouse plant. So all of your pollinators will love it. Our next invasive species is Chinese silvergrass. This is relatively new to me, but it is a tier 2 species in the capital region. So that means that eradication of this species is still possible. It originates from Asia and was introduced as an ornamental species. It is a perennial grass that grows in clumps, and those stalks, the grass stalks, can reach 5 to 10 feet high. So it's a pretty large grass. And then the foliage has alternate leaves that may be 40 long and 1 inch wide. And the flowering head of Chinese silvergrass is kind of drooping or upright and will produce a reddish pink or silver bloom. Many cultivars produce seeds, but its primary mode of reproducing and spreading is through rhizomes. So rhizomes are those kind of rhizomatous roots, and anywhere along that root, it can shoot shoots where new grasses can grow. So this rapidly spreads in areas that have been disturbed, such as roadsides. So in your garden, if you were starting a new garden bed, and this was a prominent species in that area, it would kind of go for that clean slate. So it's considered a wildfire hazard because it produces large amounts of highly flammable dry plant material, and smaller patches can be removed manually as long as all of the root is dug out of the ground, which can be difficult with those rhizomatous roots. Because even if you leave a little section of that root, that can start the population back again. So you want to revisit that site until you really don't see it anymore. And then larger infestations may be treated with herbicides. Burning is not effective and would actually help Chinese silvergrass spread. So it would have the opposite impact that you're looking for. An alternative to this is big blue stem. So this is native to the eastern 2/3 of the United States. It's a perennial grass with a simple leaf and alternate leaf arrangement. It prefers that partial sunlight and grows in the warm season. So it has that slight difference from Chinese silvergrass. It has a bit of a shorter growing season. The seed head is usually branched into 3 parts and resembles a turkey foot. And the fall color is a maroonish tan. And these plants reach about 6 to 8 feet tall, which is similar to the Chinese silvergrass. And your bonus here is that it is beneficial for erosion control. Sure, you're all pretty familiar with purple loosestrife. If you like to go out on the water or even driving on the roadside in ditches, you'll likely see purple loosestrife. It's a tier 4 species, so also widespread in the capital region. It's native to Eurasia and was introduced in the early 1800s. It's found in wetland habitats, so you'll see it again on the sides of lakes, marshes, riverbanks, and meadows. And each seed head, so each of those purple seed heads contains over 150,000 seeds. So it really has that competitive advantage over a native species, which only has, 150 seeds or 300 seeds. So that's definitely a characteristic of an invasive species that this invasive species has. And the roots of purple loosestrife are rhizomatous, similar to the Chinese silvergrass. If you like the way that purple loosestrife looks, there are some native alternatives coming up, I think, on the next slide. So wild infestations are associated with moist or marshy sites. The stems are erect, so 1.5 to 3.5 inches tall with 4 to 6 angled sides. So when you roll the stem of purple loosestrife in your fingers, it won't be smooth, it'll kind of be square. There is a control to purple loosestrife. So we talked a little bit about this at the very beginning of the presentation. You really don't see these large monocultures anymore because you have this little beetle or weevil. So the biocontrol, I believe its name is Little Larry. That's its nickname. And so Little Larry is host specific, meaning that he only eats purple loosestrife. And when that population of loosestrife is gone or mostly gone, Larry dies with it, which seems great, but there is a little bit of a downside to this. So the next year or 3 years from now, if purple loosestrife is reintroduced into that area, we'll also have to reintroduce Little Larry. But definitely a good trade-off to removing those monoculture populations. Some other control efforts that you can use are remove the flower heads prior to going seed, digging, pulling, or cutting purple loosestrife, and then using herbicide when there are greater than 100 plants. some native alternatives. Here we go. So we have blazing star or dense blazing star. So this is only found in a few states: Massachusetts, Connecticut, Maine, New Hampshire, New York, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island. And it's a globally rare plant. And it is protected under the Massachusetts Endangered Species Act. It is a perennial herb and it grows 1.2 meters tall and leaves are long, 11 to 27 centimeters long. The flowers are also similar to purple loosestrife. They're a bright pink to purple color. And they most often grow in moist prairies and meadows, so the same environment that purple loosestrife grows in as well. And these flower and fruit in the late summer. And your bonus here is that you can help repopulate a rare species. Our next, and I believe one of our last terrestrial invasive plant species that we'll be covering is the yellow flag iris. This is native to regions of Europe, Asia, and Northern Africa. You'll often see this in wetland habitats as well. It was imported to North America as an ornamental plant as early as the late 1700s. So again, before people really knew what they were doing by introducing these species. It's an herbaceous perennial that can grow between 3 and 4 feet tall. It has broad lamp-shaped leaves and has yellow showy flowers that bloom April to June. So, yep, found along the edges of lakes, ponds, rivers, and streams. And it grows well in freshwater wetlands and can tolerate high acidity. So the issue with this plant, and you can kind of see in this image on this slide, is that it creates those large populations that really displace native species. And they also offer nutrient foraging for wildlife. And caution should be used when handling these species. This is something I learned when putting this presentation together. It can cause skin irritation. So you really want to dig up the root ball of individual plants to remove small populations and avoid, getting that skin irritation. Wear some gloves. An alternative to this, and it looks almost exactly the same, except prettier, I think, is the blue flag iris. So this grows 2 to 3 feet tall with long, narrow leaves. They also have the kind of those sword-like leaves and have rhizomatous roots. The leaves have veins and appear to be kind of folded at the center. So this also grows in wetland habitats. And kind of a cool fact about these are that they're pollinated by bees and have evolved special types of flowers that are really easy for bees and pollinators to find. And the bees use the large lobes of this flower as landing pads, and special markings on the flower help direct bees to the nectar glands. So really interesting how they've evolved over time. And your bonus here is that they're a showy flower. They look almost exactly the same as yellow iris if you really like the way that that looks. So next, I think Chris might be jumping on a little bit to talk about jumping worm and spongy moth, which is formerly known as gypsy moth. It has since changed its name. And then I'll be jumping back on again after that to talk about spotted lanternfly and kind of wrapping up our presentation.
All right, Hannah. I think I need to share my screen. Let me do that real quick.
Oh, yep, and I need to stop sharing mine.
We have the right thing. So if folks have questions, I can entertain them while I'm getting my screen up. Feel free to unmute yourself.
Yeah, if anyone has a invasive species in their yard that they're thinking about replacing, or, after hearing today's presentation.
I'd love to get some of those blue flag. They're so pretty. I think I had the yellow stuff out here in the creek.
Yeah, I really like the look of the blue flag iris. I don't see it very often in this area.
Perfect.
Can you folks see the slide that I have up with the jumping worms?
Yep.
All right, very good. We do have a native plant list for nurseries in the Northeast that we can always share with folks. You just have to reach out to us, or we can direct you to a link where we can find that. But there are a lot of native retailers out there. And we do encourage people to purchase native plants from the Northeastern vendors because we help keep them viable economically by having people, just buy stock so they can stay in business. There are a lot of great services out there. It's just a little tricky finding. All right, Hannah invited me in today to talk a little bit about jumping worms and some other forest pests. I'm Christopher Williams. I'm the coordinator of the Capital Region PRISM. And I will keep an eye on my time here. So I'm going to talk about jumping worms a little bit. So first thing I'd like to start off with a takeaway for you folks is prevention is the main strategy in controlling this species. You want to take measures so you don't introduce it to your property or other people's property. Currently, there are no controls or treatments to eradicate this from your property. Okay? There are strategies you can do to help make them disappear. But again, there's no real good scientific control method. There's no biocontrol. There's no legal vermicide that you can purchase to use as a pesticide. They call them vermicides when you're killing insects to treat this. So again, prevention is the takeaway. The jumping worms are found in the Capital Region. They're found almost all over New York. They are being distributed by basically nursery stock when people purchase potted plants. And then when there are areas where there is jumping worm present, the eggs sometimes get tracked onto shoes, tires, recreational vehicles. And then those dirt particles are brought in on the shoes and transferred to new properties. If you think of lawn and garden equipment that gets transported around from one property to another, that's another way it's spread. So it's here. And again, the best prevention is to take measures to keep it from getting on your property. A couple other things I'd like to discuss. The European earthworm is also an invasive worm. Been around for a very long time. It's the one that most of us are very familiar with. Those two worms are different. One is aneic, meaning the European earthworm actually burrows deep into the ground, where the jumping worm is epigeic, where it lives in the top 3 to 4 inches of leaf litter at the surface of the earth. Okay, so there's two big differences between those two. They are both ecosystem engineers. The jumping worm has a voracious appetite and tends to turn the soil over and the leaf litter very quickly. And that lies where the problem is. Some other things to know is that there are a lot of native worms in New York State. I forget the number, but it's a couple dozen. And they are earthworms that most of us never see. The native earthworms in New York occupy ecological niches that we often don't partake in. Swamps, peat bogs, places like that. They're not widely distributed. They're not found everywhere. But again, there are native earthworms. The ones that we see most of the time, again, are the European earthworms that are commonly found in our agricultural fields, our yards, etc. All right. So, there are 3 types of jumping worms. You can see the scientific names there. It is very difficult without being a trained professional to distinguish the differences between those species. The jumping worm has originated from Eastern Asia. It is not from Europe. And again, they inhibit the soil directly below the leaf litter layer. And that's where the problem is. The jumping worm has been on the West Coast for over 20 years. It has been problematic there. The reports of the jumping worm have been in New York for over 5 years. Just not well documented, but people, we do get hordes of phone calls on this one. That and the gypsy moth, I get 20, 30 phone calls a week asking me what to do about these worms. And I just tell people to squish them or throw them in a black bag and solarize them. The other place that these are coming in is mulch amendments. That is the one most often. People are like, well, I purchased mulch, I bought bagged mulch, and now I have jumping worms, probably because the egg casings were in the mulch. The other thing is people that get mulch delivered on their property, a mulch pile that gets dumped off by the dump truck. They get 5, 6, 7 yards of mulch. They eat the wood chips. Again, they're voracious eaters. Some other things about the jumping worm. They're parthenogenic, asexual reproducing. One worm will produce offspring. It does not need to sexually reproduce, okay? And that is a problem. They are basically annuals though, if you can call that. The jumping worm, the adult worm, will not survive the winter. They die, but their eggs do overwinter. And that is where the problem is. It's the eggs, and they're small, they're tiny. So they have an annual life cycle. They mature at the same time near the end of summer. And that's when it's best to identify them, when they're large. When they're juveniles, they're really difficult to tell from, say, a European earthworm. And I'll get people bringing in bags of worms, and I look at them and I'm like, well, it's only 2 inches. There's no distinguishing features yet. I can't help you. What do you want me to do with this bag of worms? So, I try to educate people to do some of the identification diagnostics themselves. I'll go over those shortly. The capsules, the egg capsules or the cocoons, they can survive in the soil over the winter and they hatch in the spring. And the picture on the left, you actually can see some worm castings. Looks granular, sometimes like ground beef. Some people say coffee grinds, but there's an arrow pointing to a nice clean egg capsule that's like an amber color. They don't show up like that very often. They're in the soil matrix, so they kind of get brown and dirty. And there's the meter stick. And you can see that they're 2 or 3 millimeters in diameter. They're really tiny. They're very difficult to see. Mixed in with soil amendments, I think most of us are going to have a tough time trying to find them. You can look, you can check in a potted plant and say, oh, do I see any of these eggs? But again, you're probably going to miss some. And the same with boots. That you're out in the garden or you've been places where there's jumping worms. You can get that mud and dirt on your boots, and then you come home and you walk around in the boots and you transfer them. You really should be cleaning your equipment, bikes, hiking shoes, your dog's paws, all of that. So on the far right, there are some pictures of the adult jumping worm. There are some distinguishing features. And the clitellum here is this white band that goes around the neck near the head of the worm, is one of its telltale identification features. But again, this is only going to be really pronounced in June and July, typically July, August. It may not be very obvious. It may not be well developed as a juvenile. So identification, they typically are smooth, glossy, have a grayish brown color, sometimes semi-metallic, reddish gray brown color. It's a little bit hard to distinguish that colored variation, but if you put one next to a European earthworm, you'll see it. Hard to describe, slightly metallic. When they're juveniles, about 1.5 to 8 inches long when they're adult. And that narrow band around their body is smooth to the body. So in the lower picture here, you can see the jumping worm. It's smooth to the body, a little bit white. Where the European nightcrawler, it's raised and has a pinkish reddish color. So that's an identifying feature. Again, most often in the adult stage, late June, really July to August. Another identification feature is they are very, very, they have a good amount of locomotion. They can jump around. It's notable. I often kind of wonder if birds have trouble even holding them in their mouth because they're so strong. It's really obvious. It's very different than a European nightcrawler. They move really quickly. I do have people that bring in worms early in the year, April, May, where it's still cold out. You know, the soil's cold, they're not moving very fast. So you have to kind of consider the temperature at which you're trying to check these diagnostic features, you know, animals, these insects, these invertebrates. When they're really warm, they tend to move faster, but they're notably much more agile. Another thing that's unique is if you poke at them, they will shed their tails, kind of like of a lizard or a salamander. It's a defense mechanism, and that can sometimes help. You got a bunch of them, you poke around at them, see if they shed their tails. You're like, yep, okay, you have jumping worms. They also have very distinctive worm castings, very grainy, like coffee grounds or ground beef. And again, best identified in August and September. So a couple of things I like to point out to people. On the bottom left, this is a cross-section illustration of a European earthworm. And you're looking at the tiny hairs that are surrounding the body. And the European earthworm does not have very many hairs. Those hairs are used in locomotion. On the right, you have a cross-section of a jumping worm, and you can notice that the amount of hairs that are surrounding it. Now, the illustration in the photograph is a worm that's been hooked and stretched out, and you can see, you know, those little ridges where the hairs would be growing out of. Now, this is something that a professional would do underneath the microscope, stake it down, it's kind of gross, you're hooking out the worm, you're stretching it, but it's a diagnostic feature. Maybe some of you are really want to do that before you ask or make an inquiry. That could be a little fun exploration, or give it to one of your kids or your grandkids and say, hey, do you see hairs all the way around this, and teach them to be a little entomologists. So another diagnostic feature for you to be aware of. A couple illustrations. I'm going to start on the bottom right. So here you have some roots of, I think there's some lilies, I forget what they were. They're exposed. The matrix surrounding them is actually the worm castings. This is the soil and leaf litter that those jumping worms have consumed, and this is their excrement. During the eating process, they do nibble on the root hairs, which weakens the plants, opening them up to vulnerability for disease and death. They also remove the soil structure so quickly. You get the rainstorms, this casting will actually get washed away rather quickly, exposing the roots further, the soil structure is diminished, and then there's not the stability to support the spring amphiboles, your ornamentals, and in some cases, shrubs. In the forest floor, we also see the roots being exposed by the trees, which is not good. They are voracious appetite, they eat, and clean out areas. If there are deer present, there are several research studies. If deer are present, they are terrific browsers themselves, 7 to 8 pounds of leaf litter a day. In the presence of deer and worm, the jumping worm, they will actually detonate, destroy the forest floor, and there's no regeneration of any seedlings from the trees. There's no regeneration of spring amphiboles or shrubs, and it's a rather sad situation. Again, this is something you want to avoid and prevent from bringing these onto your property. So the jumping worms grow twice as fast as their counterparts. They reproduce more quickly, and they can invest soils at high densities. Again, those are all their invasive-like properties that give them an advantage of the current worms that are here. With large infestations, with the turnover of the soil and leaf litter, and that removal from erosion and weathering with rainstorms, a lot of your invertebrates, your pollinators, your salamanders, they're not able to survive, so they're pushing out those species. Jumping worms can severely damage the roots, as I had said. This includes things that we see in nurseries, gardens, lawn turf, etc. They don't move very fast when they're in an area. You know, it might take several years for them to get all throughout your yard. We're not really sure how fast that they can move into the forest, but they do, and there are things to be concerned with. There is a group out there called the J-Worm Group. The New York State Invasive Species Research Institute helps to sponsor this group, but they have some recommendations. Learn the signs and symptoms of an infestation. Look for those coffee grounds and worm castings. Look for the bare roots exposed. Learn to identify those features with the cotyledon, thrashing. Look for the detachable tails. If you're purchasing mulch or have soil amendments that you're bringing onto your property or potted plants, inspect them. I recommend not doing this, but inspect them. You can look through there, see if there's worms, see if they're castings, and if there are, don't purchase them. Don't bring them home. Try to purchase bare root stock, plant seeds, or actually purchase bare root stock from nurseries. Request it. Change the market. If you happen to get any type of plants that have jumping worms in them, make a record. Where did you buy it? What did you buy? Notify the nursery. Notify whoever the distributor was, so at least they can be aware of it and put a stop to it. They also recommend reducing yard waste. You guys that leave your leaf piles out and stuff, you're basically leaving a food source. If you have them, you're promoting their their food source. So you want to keep that yard waste. Remember, they live in the top 2 to 3 inches of the soil where the leaf litter is. Don't leave a food supply around for them. If you do get them, there's things you can do. Mustard solution. Go to the store, go to the spice rack, buy some mustard powder. You put it in a jug. There's a lot of literature. You can Google this. Mustard treatments. You can shake it up in a water jug, right? And then you drench. You do what's called a soil drench over the area where you have the suspected worms. That irritant will cause the worms to come to the surface. You can then pick them up and do the following. Some people throw them in a bucket that they can't climb out of, where they get cooked by the sun. Some people put them in a black garbage bag and tie it off and throw them on the driveway so they get solarized and cooked. Those are some things you can do. In terms of like mulch or soil, if you want to, you can also solarize it. You have some type of patio that's blacktop, and you have some soil that's bagged. You can basically cook the soil using the sun in a dark bag. You have to have temperatures above 140 degrees Fahrenheit. I have never done this. I guess I could go into my kitchen and rifle around for a meat thermometer and stick it in a bag and see if that temperature got up to 140. You will kill the adults and you will kill the eggs if you get above that temperature. The risk is if you don't get a pile of soil or dirt, every part of it cooking at that temperature, you could have viable eggs or worms that will spread into the environment. There are no legal vermicides at the moment. Back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, saponin substances were used. They're like soap-like substances that they would use in agricultural settings to drive out worms or other pests that they didn't want, like certain grubs. The problem with these products is they're not approved by the EPA or New York State labeling laws to use as a basic insecticide or vermicide. And they also harm a lot of other arthropod species. They're indiscriminate. So there are no legal vermicides on the market. Some other people have used some really toxic chemicals. There's a vermicide called 7 that basically kills anything in the dirt and soil. Typically nurseries will use this when they have serious infestations, but again, they're not legal. When you read the product label on any of these insecticides, vermicides, pesticides, you're supposed to follow them. It's the law. And if the insect or invertebrate or the bug is not on the label, you're applying the chemical incorrectly and it's not legal. So we don't have any legal vermicide recommendations other than prevention. If you get them, try to use a mustard solution to collect them and manually dispose of them. People have used excavators to dig up the top 6-7 inches of the soil. They put them in big landing pads with huge tarps and they solarize it. People have done that to some success, but there's no guarantee. Questions so far?
It doesn't look like we have any jumping worm questions in the chat box quite yet.
Oh, I have a question.
Sure.
So if I want a pot of cone flowers, for instance, could I go to Calendar's nursery, buy the pot of coneflowers, come home, take my hose and rinse all the soil off of them. And then I guess buy a bag of sterilized potting soil and repot the flowers. Would that work?
Thank you. I forgot to discuss that measure. Yes, to your question. One of the recommendations with the potted plants, I have done this in my garage. I have a 35-gallon tub that I bought from a farm and tractor store. I bring the potted plants home, hold them over the giant Tupperware container, and I rinse with as least amount of water as possible and get the bare root stock myself. Now, there's no guarantee I couldn't have one little egg on the root hair or root, but I do my best. At least I'm limiting, trying to do a good job. I inspected the soil before I brought it home. And then you could plant that in your yard. In some cases, you might not even need to buy sterilized soil, but you can. I always recommend people to use what's already on their property, right? Don't even bother the soil. The other thing is, what do you do with the rinsate in the soil? You're going to have to let the water evaporate, and then you're going to have to solarize the soil in that tub and cook it. You don't want to dump it out in your yard at a later point in time. So it requires some work. It requires a few extra steps, but it's probably worth it. I currently do have jumping worms on my property. I plan on using the mustard solution and trying to eradicate them locally. They're in 2 of my gardens. I believe they came from my neighbor's yard because I do not use mulch and I do not bring soil amendments, but it came on one of the plants. But I know my neighbors have it, and I think there's just been some transfer, unfortunately. So that's kind of a really good practice. Again, there's no foolproof that's going to guarantee that you won't get jumping worms doing that. It's kind of like anything else. If you miss one little needle in the haystack, then your goose is cooked. Other
Christopher?
questions from the group?
I have a question, Peter. My understanding of worm castings, that they have a lot of nutrients, and I have actually bought worm castings to use when I put seedling plants out in my garden. Of course, these are more than likely not jumping worm castings, but the worm castings from the jumping worms, if you could assure that they didn't have any eggs in them, wouldn't they be a good source of fertilizer?
So that's a really good point that you're making. The jumping worm castings, one, removing the eggs is going to be very difficult, costly, and expensive. I don't think there's any producers that would want to go down that road. The other issue is the castings. The jumping worms, when they consume the leaf litter and they deposit their detritus, turn the soil from a fungal-based soil into a bacterial-based soil. Okay, their castings have a lot of bacterium in it. And a lot of plants will not grow very well when it's reseeded in those castings. So it's a quite different chemical biological makeup of the soil once it's deposited by the worm. And so you answer your question, no, it would not be a good fertilizer. Just all around, there's nothing good. There's no byproduct. There's no initial product. There's not a lot that this worm provides for ecosystem function. So I totally understand what you're saying, but that is one of the other problems with the jumping worm that isn't really talked a lot, how it changes the soil composition from a fungal base to a bacterial base. And many of the flowers, plants, and crops we want do not do well in bacterial-based soils.
Christopher, that
Sure.
water that you have there, couldn't I just dump some chlorine in it? Wouldn't that kill anything that was in there?
You know, now you're introducing another chemical into the equation.
Well, leave it
Yeah,
set
you
for a
could,
while.
you could sterilize the water. My whole thing is to leave it in the garage and let it evaporate. And then it's just, how do I treat the soil? You know, you got to take care of the soil. Cooking it is the easiest and least, you know, invasive or intrusive to the environment. You know, putting a black bag over it, getting it super hot, letting it get a high temperature, that's the way to go. Could you dump chlorine into the soil? Yeah, but now you have residual chlorine byproduct in that soil. And if you want to try and use it, how does that going to affect the growing of your other plants? So that's just part of it. That's a choice you would have to make as a homeowner.
Thanks.
All right, I'm going to move on to my next topic area. Hannah, if I'm doing okay on time or not, you'll let me know.
Chris, can I ask you a quick question?
Sure, Julie.
Is there a time of year that the jumping worms are laying their eggs? So is there a safe time before they're, because I certainly have them in my garden.
I do not recall when they lay their eggs. Obviously, they're not going to do it when they're juvenile, so June is probably out. Could they be depositing their eggs in July? Maybe, but I'm suspect it's probably the July and August months that they're laying their eggs, but I could be completely wrong. So they have to be an adult. I'm not really sure. I vaguely have heard this question and the answer to it before, and I don't recall. I'm suspect as an adult, they die in those colder temperatures. It's that end of life stage where they're probably reproducing, but I don't have an answer. I'll try to find it when I come across the next expert.
Okay, thank you.
All right, my next topic is the European spongy moth, formerly known as the gypsy moth. The term spongy is actually the Latin derivative of the scientific name within the Lymantria dispar. Their egg casings are spongy, fibrous, and spongy. They're native to Europe. They first arrived in the United States and Massachusetts in 1869. This was a horrible decision by somebody who thought they could collect the silk to produce silk. Unfortunately, the gypsy moth, the spongy moth, escaped. So it's been around for quite a long time, and it does seem to pop up every 10 to 15 years in a cyclic nature. They're always present in our environment. It's just that their populations bloom and hit a critical threshold in those longer cycles. With global climate change, we've noticed in Pennsylvania, Delaware, and Maryland that the gypsy moth cycle, the spongy moth cycle, has kind of shortened. It's gone from a 12-year cycle down to a 5 and 8 year cycle, creating more problems. We did have a huge response in New York State, one of the biggest outbreaks on record in the northeastern portion here. Schenectady County got hit hard, parts of Albany County, Saratoga, Warren, and Washington counties got completely obliterated. I mean, bad. The caterpillars have a voracious appetite. They feed on over 300 trees. They definitely prefer oak. You will observe this when they get started, that they will defoliate the oak trees first. When all the oaks are missing their leaves, they then move on to the next nearest tree. Most trees will rebud. They'll use their stored reserves and starches, carbohydrates, and push out new leaves that are diminutive. And most of the time, trees will survive defoliation, especially if they're healthy trees on good sites. Trees that typically are on poor site conditions or already have health issues may suffer mortality. All trees, no matter what, if they experience 2, 3, 4 years of defoliation, probably will die. Also, there's research out there that the larger trees, your old growth trees that have, there's a lot of root and there's a lot of cambium, there's a lot of matter below ground. When they're defoliated, they can die with one defoliation, which is really unfortunate. The defoliation will weaken the immune system of the tree, leaving them susceptible to secondary mortality agents. Oh, by the way, this is the female. The female really doesn't fly around very much. Okay. If it did, I think this would be much more widespread problem. These are photographs from the Lake George Fund that were sent to me. This was a picture taken in July. It looked like fall. It was very strange to me, having these 90-degree days and no leaves on the trees. So the acreage, tens of thousands of trees were defoliated in the region to give you the scale of the problem. So a couple of things. Throughout the fall, overwintering into the spring, the spongy moth will exist in their egg casings. The eggs are coated with that material. You can see it on the chestnut oak there. you know, those are a little bit obvious to see. Sometimes they're like a more of a cream color, sometimes they have a yellow color. They will lay these on a lot of different surfaces, top of the tree, bottom of the tree, underneath signs, you know, wooden pillars, wherever. Most of the time, the eggs are deposited where the adults are pupating. You'll typically see castings of the pupated shells together with the eggs. Young caterpillars are very tiny. They're dark and hairy. As they age and go through different life cycles or instar and get bigger, they'll have characteristic markings that aid in their identification. I have a picture on the next slide. They also use silk to attach their eggs. They also use the silk to drop out of the trees. The old egg masses, again, can remain on the trees. And you know, I get a lot of calls, like people are like, what are these casings? It's like when a monarch butterfly crawls out of it, you know, it hatches, there's the casing that's left behind. It's the same thing. Adults tend to appear in early June. They are not very big. So here we go, nice photograph. So here is an egg casing. And again, these egg casings are about the size of your thumb. This is where they're coming out. You can see these tiny little creatures, 2 or 3 millimeters. They're black. You know, you have several hundred of them in one egg casing. So prolific reproduction potential there. They crawl out and then they start feeding. Here is one tree. You can see all the egg casings in the beige yellow color. You know, this tree is probably going to be doomed with that number of egg casings on there. So the spongy moth, here is actually the pupation between the caterpillar turning into the moth. You'll find these castings on trees. Here is the female in white. Notice the brown markings. Here is the male, which is a darker color that flies around. The female does release pheromones, and that's how the male will find the female. Their antennae have different structure and some identification feature. Here is the last instar of the life cycle of the gypsy moth. 1, 2, 3, 4. Notice the 5, 6 pairs of blue with the red. That is an identification feature. This guy is feeding on an oak leaf. Again, the males are mottled brown with feathery antennae. I tried to find a picture. You can kind of see it here where the mouse is. The females are more wirely antennae. They're about the size of a nickel for reference for you folks. They're small. A couple of good points to know. There are several biocontrols that have been introduced into the environment to help control the gypsy moth populations. Sorry, spongy moth populations. It's going to take me a long time to get that new terminology. So there were some pathogens that were identified in their host country that affected them. They were collected and released here in the United States sometime in the 50s, I think. I can't remember. These biocontrols work very well in the right conditions. Last year, whatever the climate was, the droughty conditions, you know, it rained a lot in the spring, like a monsoon, and then it just dried up. So the lack of humidity and moisture kept some of the biocontrols from being dispersed throughout the environment. I did identify all 3. I don't know if all 3 of them are on here, throughout Schenectady County, and then later in Saratoga, and then eventually Warren County. So there is a viral pathogen, NPV. This exists. I do believe the white-footed mouse carries this. It does get mixed in with, you know, they do kind of nibble on some of the the spongy moth caterpillars. When the spongy moth has the viral infection, it gets into their gut and it actually rots out and metabolizes and decays their innards. And the caterpillar it loses its structure, so they tend to fold in the middle of their gut and they'll have this V-like appearance. You can see some of them on the tree. So that's a good indicator that the pathogen is working in the environment. Unfortunately, I observed this probably midway through defoliation in Schenectady County, so it was a little bit late. There is a fungal pathogen. It will get into the caterpillar and make it really thin. And there's one more, which I have updated on some old slides, Hannah. It's called BTK. It's a bacterial pathogen that is in soil. Okay, BTK. It is in the soil. And last year, the droughty conditions with the high temperatures, the moisture wasn't there to kick up the bacteria, and the end result is it didn't get lifted off into the air, into the caterpillar. So, there's a lot of different things going on in the environment that kept these biocontrols from spreading quicker. With that said, you can buy BTK. Buy it early, buy it often. Last year, it was very hard to get a hold of because this was a problem in the Northeast, not just our state. The BTK you can spray on your trees. You need to do it when the caterpillars are feeding. They have to ingest it. And you can do 2 rounds of that treatment. There are some trade-offs with some of these things. Let me just go to my next slide here. Several management tactics are available to suppress spongy moth. Many have been de-emphasized because either they cost a lot, it's not practical over large areas, or it's ineffective. BTK is sprayed. The state DEC will spray some state lands. I was recently told a month ago. They don't treat private properties. So they'll do some aerial spraying to help control some of the populations where they deem that'll be more beneficial. Oops. Oh, I'm missing a slide. That's okay. No worries. There are some other chemicals that are out there, like insecticides, but they're indiscriminate. They'll kill all the other pollinators. So my recommendation for you is to seek out BTK. It is kind of host specific to the gypsy moth, and you can spray it in your trees, but it has to be done so when they're feeding. You can scrape the egg casings. You can also put burlap sack around the base of a tree. The burlap, the taping methods that you'll see when you do some Google searches, they're only good for a handful of trees. You can't do a forest. So if you have some prized heritage trees, trees you really love on your property, do the burlap. Gypsy moth are photo responsive. So when the evening comes, they get out of the tree. They drop down with their silk into the leaf litter and they hide from predators. Don't know why they do that during the night. Probably in their host country, they have some predators that eat them. And then the next morning, the sunlight comes out, they start to climb up the tree trunk. It's at this point, if you put the burlap around the tree trunk, they'll get caught in it and you can squish them. You can spray certain horticultural oils on them that are labeled for gyps or for spongy moth, and kill them that way. You can use sticky bands that people take duct tape and they wrap it around the tree. Are you going to stop all of the moth caterpillars? No, but you're going to greatly reduce the defoliation on that one specific tree. This is labor intensive. And if there's a lot of egg casings, you might not be effective at all. All right, so those are my 2 topics. Hannah, did you want me to do spotted lanternfly too?
Great, thank you. I can do spotted lanternfly if you'd prefer me to.
All right, I can't remember our conversation, sorry. It is 11:35. If you want me to pick it up, just point my finger at me and I'll do it. If you want it, just give me the thumbs up. All right, spotted lanternfly. So I don't know how many people on the call here are really into gardening, but there's been a call to action for gardeners. The spotted lanternfly, the egg casings and the instars are being transported through nursery stock. This is a high threat species. We want you looking for this and reporting it immediately if you find this creature. 2014, it made its way from China to Delaware, Pennsylvania, and it's been very actively destroying all sorts of stone fruits and hops and grapes and forests in those states. It is a high threat species for New York. This creature feeds on over 70 different plants. It's got some preferred ones, but they're mostly agricultural. It's a $400 million agricultural threat to New York State. When I say stone fruits, I'm talking like apples, cherries. The big ones that they worry about the most are the grapes and the hops. There's an industry there, right? So they also do work their way into the forest. They do have a preferred tree that they spend their life cycle on called the tree of heaven. I'll try to touch on all these things quickly and the damage they do. Bottom right, this is the spotted lanternfly. It's a tree hopper with its wings open. You're not going to see them too often with their wings open. They really encourage you to try and look for the adults late in the summer in the middle pictures here where the mouse is moving. Those weird polka dot peach beige color, I can't even describe it. It looks really obvious. It is a fantastic camouflage. When you're 2 or 3 feet away, you might not see them with that camouflage. It works. Earlier on, they have these instars. There's this period of time where it kind of exists as a bug. It hasn't developed as an adult with its wings yet. It's black. And it's later instar when it starts to, just before it develops its wing, it has red, white, and black. Okay, these are things you look for early season. And this is actually, there's probably about 20 eggs underneath this egg casing here. You can see the material that they put over their eggs to protect it also is camouflage. They're very difficult to spot, believe it or not. So they feed on apples, grapes, hops, other stone fruits. You know, in New York, we produce 30 million bushels of apples each year. The grapes in New York are valued at an annual harvest around 52.8 million. You know, they don't necessarily kill the trees, they don't necessarily kill the grapevines, but they do nibble on the fruits and they render them non-viable for sale. They do have secretion of waste, which is honeydew, lots of sugar that attracts something called sooty mold, and it's the mold that actually damages the crops. So it's a big issue. You can see here from the Department of Ag and Markets, this is where there are breeding infestations that are controlled. The map is a little bit outdated. There should be this aqua blue color is all the way up to Kingston, New York, right here where the arrow is. It's encroaching the Hudson Valley where we live. It's spread throughout all the 5 boroughs recently, as of last year. 2 years ago, just Staten Island. Last year, all 5 boroughs, and then over 168 breeding populations in the lower Hudson counties. I'm anticipating it will be here very shortly. Sorry. So here's one of the later instars. You can see it. Here's a really bad, infestation where it's all over this tree of heaven. You can see them in the hundreds and the multitudes. So they are prolific breeders and they have a lot of offspring. So damage. Again, they render the fruits not viable for edible or sale production. The sooty mold that they secrete is really gross. So this is understory spring emerald. It's covered in the sooty mold. It will reduce the photosynthesis and it will kill the plant. It smells awful. Infestations in Pennsylvania near diners, cafes, they get shut down. The sooty mold gets all over the streets, the tables, they shut down. So there's another economic impact there. Here you can see some of the sooty mold that's built up over time at the base of a tree. This is peppered with adults crawling all over it, feeding on the tree. You see the grapes here. You can see the spotted lanternfly crawling all over the grapes. The glossy areas on the grapes is actually the waste material. They're secreting the honeydew. I do have a picture of this where it's live. You can just see them basically micturating all over the fruits, and then the mold moves in. It's gross. So the feeding can cause a reduction in cold hardiness. The plants have been weakened. They have weeping and oozing of their xylem and phloem where the bite marks are. They wilt, there's defoliation, and eventually the plants can die. In extreme cases, we are seeing vineyards being completely wiped out after feeding. They die within a season in infestation. Grapes take a long time to grow before they can come to market. If this problem consists, and it isn't kept in check, I could see our wine prices skyrocketing. Well, that would be terrible. Fuel's bad enough, right? I got some smiles. All right, life cycle real quick. So here you have October, the eggs are laid, sometimes June, September, October, even into November, the females will lay eggs. The eggs will be underneath this putty-like secretion. In May and June, you're looking for the little black bug. It kind of looks like a wood tick, but it has these white spots. It's really unique. So May and June, this is what you're looking for. Inspect your nursery stock when you're bringing it on your property, along with those crazy worms. And then it goes through a couple molts. It gets larger and larger. June, July, into July, it gets a little bigger. Finally, sometime in July, August, September, it puts on the red color. It will have its last instar. It molts into the adult with the wings. That's what it looks like. So you see these July, October, November, December. Yeah, even after a frost, we want you looking for them. They're still moving around and laying their eggs. And then finally, they're laying their eggs. And we also ask people to look for the egg casings. Here's some coloration of the eggs. You know, fresh putty over the top of the egg. You know, they do get weathered. They turn this grayish brown color, really, really good camouflage. They will actually deposit on metal surfaces, boat trailers, RVs, campers. The semis that stay in Pennsylvania and New Jersey and Delaware, the infestations are, when they enter New York, they're pulled over and they're actually inspected by the DEC along with state troopers for the egg casings and the bug. They have to have a permit coming out of the quarantine. If they have a permit, they get inspected, trying to slow down the spread. Again, here's the egg casing that's a little bit weathered and cracked, but you can see how it's really hard to tell. You know, if you're just casually walking through your yard, you might not see this. This middle picture are the actual eggs without the casing over the top. I think it's usually 28 to 32 egg casings under each one of these little putty-like structures. You know, it says 30 to 50. I think it's in the mid to low 30s is the normal count that we've seen. So, you know, expecting things, when you're bringing things on your property, do your part, help us look for them. Places though also that these would come from, goods and services. Think of Amazon or the Ace warehouses where they bring all the semis in. You know, if you live near those areas, that's a likely place to spread as a vector point. So make sure you're inspecting your vehicles, inspecting nursery stock, looking at your trailers when you're traveling through those aqua blue quarantined areas. The other big thing is we want you to report. If you see spotted lanternfly, take some high quality photos. Whew. People send me pictures and it's blurry and I'm like, great, you sent me a smudge. What do you want me to do with that? You obviously had to look at it. You know it's blurry. You can't make it out. You know, we need to have expert confirmation. We might actually come out and confirm it. We'll notify the Department of Ag and Markets. They'll send a horticultural inspector and come out and confirm it. All depends. We might actually put it in a bag, put it in the freezer. You can put it in rubbing alcohol or sanitizer to help preserve it. But we want you to collect the sample. Don't destroy it. You know, don't smash it. Collect it so we can, you know, look at it and identify it. Note the date, time, location, GPS coordinates, and where you found it, how you found it. There is an email, a website, spotted lanternfly. You can just Google New York State Department of Agriculture and Markets, spotted lanternfly. They have a reporting system. They will sometimes come out with, if you tell them that there is a breeding population, they'll be there within 24 hours. They might actually cut down a tree. They might actually treat it with chemicals. They are very friendly about the process. They're there to help. And so are we do the same thing. So reach out to the PRISM or preferably the Department of Ag and Markets. Well, you know, once you have them and you've reported it, you can scrape them, crush the eggs, put them in alcohol, destroy them, put them in the garbage, okay? Seal up the bag. But first, we want to make sure you report it and have them are able to be identified before they're destroyed. But if you know you have them and they're coming, you can destroy the eggs. It helps. All right, Hannah, I'm going to turn this over to you. And if people have questions, I'll linger for about 5 minutes.
Great, thanks. I can start sharing my screen.
I think I stopped sharing.
Yep, you did. Yeah, I think that
minutes over.
the terrestrial pests are always really interesting to talk about.
Hello?
Question from the field there before we wrap up?
Yes, I have a question going back to your gardening. As far as using a mulch on your garden now, is it recommended not to use mulch, or is there a certain type of mulch that you should use? Like just real clean straw and not anything like that's been composted or what?
Yeah, I don't have a great recommendation for you. One, I'm a big fan of pollinator gardens, and my bees nest in the ground. And mulch actually keeps the pollinators from nesting in the ground. So I don't use mulch. I will grind up leaf litter or use the leaves in my gardens. I try to grow my, gardens really thick so you can't see the soil. Mulch does have its purpose. It helps retain moisture and protect the roots of plants if it's not too deep. I don't remember. I think you can buy mulch that's been sterilized, but I'm sure it's not the $4 a bag thing at the box retail store. So you could do that. It's just maybe you might want to start thinking of other ways to protect your soil and make your garden. I mean, mulch looks nice, really looks nice. Your other option is to solarize it. But yeah, it's kind of tricky. You recognize that it's a vector for bringing in pests, and what's the trade-off, if you're trying to protect your plants.
Well, I have a good source of, barn cleaning, horse manure with the litter in it and everything. And it does get heated up. I don't know if it all gets heated up to temperature. It's going to kill all of the eggs or anything, but that's what we've used for years to mulch in between our rows, and also breaks down for, nutrients for the soil. And I don't know if we're doing any harm by doing that, or,
I think you're doing the right thing. You're using product that's from your own property and it's not transported in.
Okay.
So I'm a big fan I have my own mulch piles that I'm always composting. I
All
don't bring in amendments from off-site.
All right. The other question too, quickly, is diatomaceous earth. We use that for the control of slugs. Would that be anything we could use in the soil for the jumping worms?
I've heard this question before and I don't know the answer. It's not in the recommendations. So they must be able to consume it and secrete it. I know it's a dissectant. You could try as an irritant, people do, but there is no research saying that diatomaceous earth works.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome. One last question, then I'm signing off. Thank you, everyone. Hannah, you have the floor.
All right, great. Thank you. Yep, I just have a couple of slides left and then we will wrap up. Okay, so our conclusion, why we conduct invasive species work. We do it for a lot of reasons, mostly aesthetics, ecology, resiliency, economics, protecting our economy, future preservation for all of our future generations, and to also stop new infestations from occurring. And then some takeaways for the gardeners that joined us today. We encourage you to remove your invasive plants from your garden and replace them with native species, to remove and destroy seed heads before they spread, like that purple loosestrife. Never propagate or invasives or share cuttings, and talk to other gardeners about invasive species, raise awareness, and maybe they have a problem species that they're dealing with also. These are some native planting resources. If you would like these, feel free to email me. I can put my email in the chat box. Chris had touched on these earlier, just some, local nurseries that sell the native plants. And I'll end with a quote from Rachel Carson. The more clearly we can focus our attention on the wonders and realities of the universe about us, the less taste we shall have for the destruction of our race. Wonder and humility are wholesome emotions, and they do not exist side by side with a lust for destruction. And we did talk a little bit today about the use of herbicides and vermicides. So always follow the label on the back of any herbicide or vermicide that you're using. And I'll try and stop sharing my screen. There we go. So thank you everybody for joining. I can stay on for a few more minutes too. I think that we ended about 7 minutes early, so we're almost right on time.
Hi, Hannah. Can you just put your email into the chat box? That would be the easiest thing.
Yep.
And thank you. This was great.
Yeah, we're really happy that we could be here today.
Yeah, very informative. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you.